all started with the Disney Renaissance. The early 1990s for Walt Disney Animation will undisputedly go down as the best years the company as a whole will ever see, as the CEO at the time, Michael Eisner, appointed Jeffrey Katzenberg as head of the division, who would go on to help lead the studio in the development of The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. This consistent string of critically acclaimed films put the once floundering Disney Animation studio back on the map, and during this time, Disney Animation was beginning to innovate, most notably the Computer Animation Production System, or CAPS, which integrated electronically scanned images and digitally coded camera movements to not only allow for creative leeway, but also streamline some of the laborious work and time costs needed to pump out such an extensive number of classics in so short of time. This system was available thanks to a little-known computer animation company called Pixar, who made a small deal with Disney to jointly develop, produce, and distribute a couple of itty-bitty full-length animated features within the next few years. You know, nothing crazy or anything. With the Disney name once again at the peak of animated filmmaking and the rapidly developing technology making waves within the animated industry as a whole, nothing could hope to topple the two giants heading one of the largest entertainment companies in the world. Yes, nothing could possibly go wrong. On April 3, 1994, then president of the Disney company, Frank Wells, would die in a helicopter accident during a skiing expedition in Nevada. Wells was clearly a beloved member of the Disney family, receiving his own window memorial in Disneyland on Main Street, alongside the likes of Ken Anderson, Buddy Baker, Mary Blair, and even Walt Disney's own father, and even having his name placed in the Matterhorn ride, as a nod to his love of mountain climbing. It was obvious that the company was shaken by Wells' sudden passing, but it also meant that his position as president had to be filled. And who better to take Frank Wells' place than the man who was not only vying for the position, but also helped boost the Disney Animation Studio into the juggernaut that we all remember as kids. Eisner, however, had other plans, choosing Michael Ovitz for the role instead. Katzenberg, as would be expected, wasn't too happy about the decision, and, presumably with a few choice words, walked out on the Disney company. As quoted from a board member in the Washington Post, Mr. Eisner and the board felt that it just wasn't an appropriate promotion. We didn't feel that he had the skills for that particular job. All of the good Katzenberg had done for the company was repaid with betrayal and contempt. Ovitz wouldn't stick around for very long, only lasting 2 years before the position would once again be left vacant. But Eisner was there to stay, and Jeffrey Katzenberg had yet begun to fight.
Katzenberg said he doesn't know where he's going yet. Sony denied rumors he's heading there. Sources said Universal was a possibility should either of its top 2 executives retire next year. The Dallas Cowboys won 2 straight Super Bowls, yet their owner and coach parted company. Disney recently reported record revenues and earnings for the 9 months ended in June. And experts say even this major management shakeup won't dwarf Disney's ability to build on that success. Kevin Smith of Reuters for NBR, Burbank, California.
The same year he left the Disney company, Katzenberg would team up with David Geffen and Steven Spielberg to create DreamWorks SKG. This budding company most likely aimed to compete with Disney, not just because Katzenberg was one of the founders, but also Steven Spielberg himself had long been seen as a competitor of the company for his contributions to the Universal theme parks and for funding ex-Disney animator Don Bluth's films with his own animation studio, Amblimation. Being the ex-head honcho at Disney's animation studio, Katzenberg naturally headed the animation production for DreamWorks. But there was a problem. Katzenberg, reportedly, wasn't the best when it came to directing animated features. For one, the movie in production when Katzenberg began his work at Disney was The Black Cauldron, which Katzenberg promptly gutted and claimed to be too dark, violent, and scary. He also reportedly attempted to remove Part of Your World from The Little Mermaid, assuming that the song was too boring for kids. And just imagine what kind of movie that would have been without the song. And when both Lion King and Pocahontas were being produced simultaneously, Katzenberg was vocal about how much more important Pocahontas was than The Lion King, having all their top animators work on it over the supposedly more riskier project. But hey, hindsight and all that. Most infamously, though, Katzenberg was responsible for what was known to those who worked at Pixar as Black Friday. Katzenberg had insisted on making Woody more edgy, which resulted in a test reel that was so bad that Disney almost shut down the whole production. In it, Woody, instead of accidentally dropping Buzz out the window, intentionally throws Buzz outside and screams and berates the rest of the toys when they confront him.
Hey, spuds for brains! What do you think you're doing? Off the bed. Hey! Off the bed!
You gonna make us, Woody?
No. He is. Slinky! Slinky! Get up here and do your job!
From testimonies from the people working for the animation studio at the time, it seems like it was almost a fluke that Katzenberg was the one responsible for leading Disney through its golden age of animation. So what would he be bringing to this burgeoning new animation studio meant to be Disney's competition? Put simply, subterfuge. Shortly after DreamWorks had set up, Lasseter had approached Katzenberg to tell him about their next big project, at the time titled Bugs. Lasseter would later lament that in the meeting, Jeffrey kept asking questions about when it would be released, because, shortly after, Katzenberg had hired a studio called Pacific Data Images to begin development of Ants, and even agreed to have DreamWorks purchase 40% of their company if they could release Ants before Pixar released Bugs Life. When Lasseter caught wind of Katzenberg's shenanigans, he tried to ask him what he was doing, to which Lasseter alleges that he started talking about all this paranoid stuff about conspiracies, that Disney was out to get him. He said he had to do something. That's when I realized it wasn't about me. We were just cannon fodder in his fight with Disney. Katzenberg's plan was to use Ants as leverage to coerce Disney to delay the release of Bugs Life, as he was afraid its release would hurt the release of their true major project, The Prince of Egypt, slated to come out at the end of that same year. Lasseter was crushed, and even Steve Jobs, the CEO of Pixar, joined in the fight, accusing Katzenberg of extortion and refusing to change the planned release of A Bug's Life. So Ants would release a mere month before A Bug's Life, in an attempt to steal any of its thunder with a similar bug-related movie. Though the movies do differ greatly, where one is the tried-and-true tale of an adventurous and misunderstood youth finding his way in society, mixed in with the plot of The Seven Samurai, or Magnificent Seven, or The Three Amigos. The other was a confusing, tone-deaf Woody Allen film featuring classic kids' themes such as depression, eugenics, PTSD, war, dismemberment, torture, and Marxist uprisings. Yeah, it's pretty bad when choosing between the good guy and the bad guy, you'd rather pick neither.
I mean, if this Z cares so much about us, then why isn't he here? I'll tell you why. Because Z doesn't give a damn about us.
I mean, he's not wrong. The whole movie up to this point is the Woody Allen ant complaining about being an ant. As this New York Times review of the movie puts it, the military leader, General Mandible, Gene Hackman, has big dreams that involve sacrificing the little people, to the point where Ants invokes the Holocaust with jarring abruptness. But hey, the part with the shoes is pretty fun though. Though I think it's mostly the music here. It starts getting Pirates of the Caribbean-y. Overall, the music in Ants is really good, actually, but it just doesn't have that same charm I think A Bug's Life does. I am biased, though. I think every kid back then had that one movie they'd watch over and over growing up. Mine was Bug's Life. This is where the battle between the two juggernauts would truly begin, with Ants. Neither movie was remarkable enough to leave any kind of lasting impression, and though the Disney company itself was DreamWorks' intended competitor, this betrayal would, instead, create a rivalry against Pixar that would last for years. The two leading companies in computer animation attempting to outshine the other, to the delight of kids like myself growing up in the early 2000s. And, I mean, let's be honest, Pixar has kind of made itself the de facto face of Disney over the past decades. DreamWorks, however, would step away from computer animation for a time and find some success with the likes of Prince of Egypt, and Road to El Dorado. They would even dip into the dying art of claymation and team up with Aardman Animation for Chicken Run. So while DreamWorks was busy making me feel mortified at the plight of talking poultry and jump-starting my dive into puberty, on the other side of the battlefield, Disney's animation studio, now under the management of Peter Schneider, was starting to see a decline in quality with the release of Tarzan and Fantasia 2000. A curious choice for Disney, as the original Fantasia was famously a massive flop. Then the actual year 2000 brought two more mediocre films, with the likes of Dinosaurs, I don't think anyone even remembers what that was, and The Emperor's New Groove, which I would argue is one of Disney's funniest films, if maybe not the most technically amazing. It was, yet again, a far cry from the quality and attention to detail that Disney Animation had been known for. Meanwhile, Pixar was staying the course with a critically acclaimed sequel to their first and arguably most popular franchise. Granted, they only had one at the time. Yeah, no love for Bug's Life, man, I tell ya. For the first 3 years, DreamWorks seemed to have failed to be the Disney killer it had set out to be, against the fast-growing and instant success Pixar was. But DreamWorks would eventually get over its awkward phase and find its footing, putting them on the map as a multi-billion-dollar company we know today, with the release of an all-star franchise. Yeah, get it? An all-star. Arguably, Shrek was the movie that finally put DreamWorks on the map and began their tradition of being snarky and in your face with their character designs. It may have been 2001, but that 90s tood became DreamWorks' bread and butter for years to come. The icing on the cake, though, was that Shrek also happens to be filled with thinly veiled jabs at the Disney company and their IPs. The villain of the story enslaves beloved fairy tale characters and lives in a barren castle/theme park.
That must be Lord Farquaad's castle.
Uh-huh, that's the place.
Do you think maybe he's compensating for something?
And just the general concept of making an animated fairy tale that pokes fun at the tropes of animated fairy tales, like the transformation of a monster into a beautiful human, the princess who can sing to animals, the movie being an adaptation of a children's book. Wait, it was a book? A lot of it seemed to mirror and then poke fun at traditional Disney ideas. Roger Ebert himself points out in his review of the movie, many of these creatures bear a curious correspondence to Disney characters who are in the public domain. The three little pigs turn up, along with the three bears, the three blind mice, Tinkerbell, the big bad wolf, and Pinocchio. Later, when Farquaad seeks a bride, the magic mirror gives him three choices: Cinderella, Snow White,
Although she lives with 7 other men, she's not easy.
and Princess Fiona. He chooses the beauty, who has not had the title role in a Disney animated feature. No doubt all of this, and a little dig at Disney World, were inspired by feelings DreamWorks partner Jeffrey Katzenberg has nourished since his painful departure from Disney. It's also been largely speculated that Lord Farquaad was a caricature of Eisner himself, though these claims are often shot down by Katzenberg. Regardless, DreamWorks finally found their formula for success, having finally surpassed $200 million in the box office and even winning an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature that year. What followed, however, was Spirit and Sinbad, which, believe it or not, wasn't enough to compete with Pixar's new instant classic, Finding Nemo. Sinbad allegedly did so terribly that it was the death knell for any would-be classically animated features at DreamWorks, the company instead opting for computer animation the rest of the way, beating Disney Animation Studios by 2 years before they gave up on cell animation entirely and moved on to full CG, starting with Chicken Little. Huh, okay. DreamWorks would quickly pick themselves up with the successful sequel to Shrek, again utilizing satire that seemed directed at Disney and their legacy. See, the fairy godmother and Prince Charming are the bad guys in this one. That and Tom Waits as Captain Hook.
I like my town.
That has nothing to do with Disney, but I always thought it was a cool little cameo. But then after this, DreamWorks would unleash Shark Tale, just a month before Pixar's Incredibles, and just barely a year after Pixar had already come out with their own Fish movie. And once again, we're back to the dark ages of Ants and Bugs Life, where both come out roughly around the same time and have a similar setting. But one goes on to be beloved for years, and the other is just, well, it's something. Where Finding Nemo is a simple coming-of-age film about family and independence, Shark Tale is about an unlikable fish who succumbs to the torments of fame after becoming a false idol. That, and the sharks are mobsters, and the jellyfish are Rastafarians.
Hey, boss, big butts.
It's a bit inane. Again, this comes down to personal preference, but I've always felt that DreamWorks in its early years were really bad at making likable characters and relying too heavily on pop culture references. Kind of a stark contrast to what Pixar would later become, almost completely humorless and getting way too emotional. Not that there's anything wrong with an animated children's movie not taking itself seriously. I mean, obviously. But I think Pixar was just better at balancing a story's tone and building a more pleasant atmosphere. And the box office numbers seem to agree with this sentiment. I did find a review from 2004 praising this movie, though. The writer ends on this. The key thing to note is that Shark Tale represents solid family entertainment, and will find a special place in the hearts of those who adore the Godfather movies and the TV series The Sopranos. Ah yes, peak family entertainment. Meanwhile, Roger Ebert says, the problem with this story is that the movie pays too much attention to it, as if we really cared. Most successful animation has a basic level where even small children can easily identify. Little Nemo wanted to escape from the fish tank and return to his father in the ocean. Every kid understands that, but how much will they care in Shark Tale that Oscar wants to clear his debt with the loan sharks and become rich and famous? This is kind of where I think DreamWorks struggled in the early years. Though groundbreaking now, it was kind of hard to get out successful films that tried to appeal to adults, more so than children, even though animated films at the time were mainly directed towards children. Ebert also goes on to mention how the voice cast of animated films are now becoming the stars of said films, even though you don't actually see them in the movie. Man, that's something I've been saying forever now. I mean, what's the point of getting, say, Chris Pratt to voice a character when you could easily hire a voice actor and get the same, if not better result, for probably a quarter of the cost? This phenomenon may have been caused by the success of Robin Williams as the genie in Aladdin, which was a choice made by Katzenberg. And from then on, all animated features do this kind of stunt casting in the hopes of it garnering more public attention. And even though Pixar had taken to the trend, DreamWorks seems to have made the practice a key part of their productions, making the characters more a representation of the star playing them than a personality given to them on a script.
What if Steve Martin were Goofy? Wouldn't that be fabulous? Imagine how you could sell that. That would be great. I think I asked Jeffrey, I said, so that means you want Steve Martin to do the Goofy voice? No. He's going to use his own voice so that we know who he is.
But I digress. Finding Nemo got its fair share of criticism too, mostly complaints about Marlin and Dory being annoying characters, which I can agree with.
I have to find the boat.
A boat? Hey, I've seen a boat.
You have?
Uh-huh, and it passed by not too long ago.
A white one?
Hi, I'm Dory.
Where?
And I found this review that says, the story lacks a particularly prominent villain, which has always been something that juices up elementary adventure tales. Now, I'd argue the movie has multiple, very obvious villains, but that's just me. This time, Katzenberg himself would state that any similarities between the two movies were merely a coincidence. It's important to note that Ants and Bugs Life were the only movies that there's evidence of intentional copying, and no evidence exists that would suggest these two were another attempt at messing with Pixar's income, or vice versa. There will be more instances down the line where people would speculate the studios attempting to steal from each other, and it just goes to show how badly DreamWorks shot themselves in the foot with the Ants movie debacle. It's a first impression of the company that people just assumed kept going on throughout the years. Regardless, Pixar blew DreamWorks out of the water, even after their release of what would become another flagship IP of theirs, Madagascar, which I finally watched for the sake of this video, and because, I don't know, I guess I might as well watch it eventually. It only took 2 decades. It once again gives me whiplash how quickly these movies go from slapstick and toilet humor to references to things not even a lot of millennials will get. That was a reference to the original National Geographic, which is way older than I am. But speaking of similar movies coming out from two different companies, Disney would then throw their hat in the ring this time and release essentially the same movie a year later called The Wild. Okay, so this one I legitimately didn't even know existed, but the plots are practically the same. Zoo animals that end up getting shipped to Africa. Disney at this point had been stepping away from animation almost entirely, unless it was to release another poorly received sequel. So for them to have been in the production of a movie that DreamWorks had already released is some pretty bad luck. According to one review at the time, this time Disney has secured second place with this version of Zoo Animals Gone Wild story. And truth be told, even if The Wild were up against 50 other competitors, it would still probably end up back of the pack. Damn. Yeah, that's harsh. Maybe if The Wild had obnoxious dancing lemurs, it would have done better. Or even be slightly relevant, for that matter. But at the end of 2005, Pixar had once again come out on top. DreamWorks being doomed to perform as the perpetual underdog, and Disney as the also-ran. But things were boiling under the surface between Disney and Pixar that were about to change the game forever. Most people know at this point, especially those that studied the history of the Disney theme parks during his tenure, that Eisner didn't have the greatest track record when running the company, and one of the most damning mistakes he had made started back in 2002. According to Steve Jobs' biography, titled Steve Jobs, Eisner had a memo leaked to the Los Angeles Times that stated, "Yesterday we saw for the second time the new Pixar movie, Finding Nemo, that comes out next May. This will be a reality check for those guys. It's okay, but nowhere near as good as their previous films. Of course, they think that it's great." This had either started, or maybe even fanned the flames of a long-running animosity between Jobs and Eisner, as Jobs would also publicly belittle the shoddy work Disney's animation studio had been putting out for the past few years. Jobs was unhappy about the deal between Pixar and Disney, which gave Disney the rights to Pixar's characters and allowed them to make sequels to their movies without their input. Disney had even started Circle 7 Animation, a company formed solely to make direct-to-video sequels to Pixar's IPs, even going so far as to have a draft for Toy Story 3 already submitted in 2004. In short, Eisner had been pushing Pixar away, something that a lot of the Disney top brass saw as the doom of their company, and it was this, along with many other poor management choices, that would force the Disney brand at large to step up. In 2003 to 2004, then ex-members of the board of directors Stanley Gold and Roy E. Disney, nephew of Uncle Walt himself, started the Save Disney campaign, an online petition of sorts that was a rallying cry to both fans of the Disney company and its shareholders to inform the board that Eisner had to go, citing deteriorating performance, loss of strategic focus, creativity and talent, and damaged relationships. This focusing mainly on Eisner's poor relations with Pixar. On multiple occasions, we urged the Disney board and management that the Disney-Pixar relationship must remain secure. The Disney board and management ignored these warnings and allowed this critical relationship to disintegrate. Failure to renew the relationship exemplified senior management's short-term focus at the expense of long-term value creation. These events clearly demonstrate Mr. Eisner's poor management, lack of long-term strategic vision, insularity, inability to maintain relationships with Disney's business partners, and the current board's failure to exercise active oversight. After this came out, and once the annual shareholders meeting came and went, a whopping 43% of the shareholders voted to not have Eisner reinstated, which forced him to resign from the company in 2005, being eventually replaced by Bob Iger, who would then take steps to reconcile any bad blood between the Disney company and Pixar. As would be expected, things seem to have begun dying down after one half of the corporate feud's instigators was given the axe. And to further suffocate this flame of competition, 2006 brought only mediocre results from the two production teams. Pixar's Cars and DreamWorks' Over the Hedge were both movies that fell well below what both companies were used to making. As one review puts it, Cars is certainly a step down for Pixar, but it was bound to happen at some point. Over the Hedge received even worse criticisms, like, it's all cute and fairly disposable, none of the jokes are barbed enough to stick in the mind for too long, and the situations are achingly familiar. Or Over the Hedge, like previous DreamWorks animated releases Shark Tale and Madagascar, is pleasing to the eyes, but doesn't sit well with one's heart and conscience. Not even Aardman's Flushed Away would help, with its box office gross barely covering its cost. Which is a damn shame, because I think it's an awesome movie. I mean, you got the Wolverine and Magneto doing voice work, the setting and humor is flat and very British, and despite it being CG, Aardman still managed to keep the animation just close enough to the original stop-motion look. Plus, I'm a fan of the slugs. And of course, Ratatouille came out the next year, and, you know, a movie about rats and all. But I'd argue that the Bee Movie, which DreamWorks would also release the next year, has way more similarities. Both are about a pest befriending a human and ultimately making the pests accepted by humans and improving their life. Also, a Jewish comedian playing a bug who rebels against the class system of the colony and takes on a job they weren't born for. And the colony is in Central Park. It's like, did they realize they just remade Ants? Was it intentional? Again, the similarities are probably purely coincidental, and even these two movies did significantly worse than their films a year prior, and are still a far cry from the numbers seen by their predecessors. Now, I can't claim to read the minds of two major corporations, even though I've been pretending I can for the past half hour or so, but it seems like at this point the back and forth was finally broken, and the two companies would focus more on their image and telling stories independent of what their competitor was up to. DreamWorks in the following years would expand and grow their unique identity, which seems to be one that's very memeable, for what it's worth. With original new franchises such as Kung Fu Panda and How to Train Your Dragon only further separating themselves from what other animation companies at the time were doing, while Pixar would fall into sequel purgatory, only branching out to new ideas when their focus seemed more on the technical aspects of their work. I swear The Good Dinosaur is just an hour and 30-minute long tech demo of how beautiful and realistic they can make their movies look. That, and as mentioned earlier, this is when they would start becoming dead set on trying to make us cry. Ever since Up was praised for that one sequence, they just never let it go, I guess. Oh, and speaking of, Disney's animation studio would eventually make Frozen. So I guess they're doing alright for themselves too. Though the competition probably still rages on in some regards between the companies, the corporate battle that was started by Katzenberg and Eisner seems to have long since subsided. Eisner would start an investment firm in 2006, and Katzenberg would later step down as CEO of DreamWorks in 2016. The two driving forces between this era of computer animation taking their feud with them. A feud that involved billions of dollars and a whole hell of a lot of processing power. And though most companies should welcome competition to force upon them an incentive to improve, one can only wonder what these massive production companies would have accomplished if their leadership hadn't started off with hostility for one another. And perhaps the lesson to be learned from all this can be traced back to Frank Wells, who, according to those that knew him, always kept a quote with him on a piece of paper that simply said, "Humility is the final achievement." Thank you so much for watching, especially if you've made it this far. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe and check out some of my other videos, like my in-depth look into the early Super Mario Bros. Scripts, or my review of that Peter Pan prequel that no one seems to talk about. Hopefully I'll be seeing you again soon, and until then, you're awesome.